All right, so be on your best behavior now. No more cursing, no more lewd comments. All right, so for those who might be joining and listening into this recording later on, this is the April 17th meeting, 2018, for the Raleigh Power BI user group. Tonight we're going to be discussing connecting to the Meetup API as a data source within Power BI. So let me reduce that and go back over to my browser, which has the Meetup API key on it. Luckily that's masked, so you guys can't see my key. Earlier today, I actually exceeded my capacity on making a request, and I've been locked out, and I had to do some research on that separately. So this key is not something that you're going to want to keep very public. So you guys probably remember this report that I've shown you over the past. This is our report about our team, or about our group here. And you'll notice that, first of all, good signs. Since last month, I think we were in the 60s for members. As I refresh the data later this afternoon, we're now up to 88 members. And you can see that if I hone in only on those users from the United States, the vast majority of us are centrally located here around the Winston-Salem through Greensboro over to Durham and Raleigh areas. Our technology interests are generally the same. The word technology, data, development all come up quite frequently on our interests. These are based as topics within the Meetup infrastructure. I also see that not many of you have added in your Twitter link, but most of you seem to have a link into Meetup. Actually, that would be required, but very few on Facebook as well. I actually haven't done my Facebook, and I don't tend to put my social, personal media contacts in with my professional ones. For me, Twitter is actually a professional tool. Other group information, these are the groups that the rest of you, or the other groups I should say, that all of you are members of. And we can see that those are spread out all across the country, and they have similar interests, but more varied. So some of the larger groups, this Docker Online meetup, have numbers up into the 12,000s. Now the reason I'm drawing attention to this is because the report that I'm trying to put together, I'm not just trying to make this report for me, or even just for our group to be able to see and use. I'm trying to make this a tool that anyone who has a Meetup group and a desktop version of Power BI will be able to just plug in their credentials, their group name and their API key, and automatically refresh and hydrate their data set. Now, as you do it the way I did it when I put this version of the report together, it's not hard. It takes a little bit of reading, a little bit of research, and I'll show you how I did that and where I found the answers inside of the Meetup API documentation that's online. They even have a nice little console for you to try out your requests against their data and get the responses back. That's not all that hard to do, but what is hard to do is automating it, making it refreshable easily, and making it generic enough so that anybody can use it and still hit the scope of everything that the API offers as a source. So our group takes several factors out of that. Some Meetup groups like to charge for events, so they'll actually collect money through the Meetup website that will be paid to the organizers. I don't know if many folks do that for profit. Do any of you guys belong to any groups that will charge you for an event?
Occasionally to cover the cost of food.
Okay, so sometimes for food.
Or if they rent space, that can be kind of expensive.
Okay. So are these more professional groups, or are they maybe social that you're associated with? Or if you don't mind sharing, I've never belonged to one that requires payment.
Well, I think probably more social groups.
Okay.
It's harder to get sponsors because there's no.
Of course, yeah, there's no real
game to
demographic that you're trying to target there.
Mhm.
Perhaps singles or young adults or something like that. But that data, probably not something I'm going to be all that interested in. But again, in trying to make this a repeatable, usable by anybody type of report, I want to try to expose everything that API allows me to. So as I started doing that, I took a look at things like our group information, our internal demographics, through the members of our group. And then I was able to find all this interesting information about where we're from and the other links that we have to other social networks. And thank you. Got a little background noise there. So that's about our members. Then I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to take a look at all the other groups that everyone's associated with and see how we stack up? And of course, at this point in the double digits, we really don't stack up to some of the biggest ones that you guys are associated with. But not all of these are really fair comparisons. Some of these are more social. They probably don't have as many people showing up as a ratio to their average meeting. But still, I wanted to know things about our internal RSVPs. So I came up with a call to request for those. And we could find out who had RSVP'd and whether they RSVP'd yes or no. And I used that information to drive the sign-up sheet that you guys signed up on. So I use that to automatically generate this thing, and this just gives me a little validation down here that I'm doing things correctly, because when I go out to the meetup site and I look at this particular event meeting, I see that we have had, in fact, 28 positive RSVP returns. So I'm lining up with what the site's telling me. I then came to the conclusion that it was very tedious the way I was going about it. So here's where I started. I came out to meetup.com. Actually, I'll show you guys the main place that you do this, because it's not just Meetup that does this kind of thing. Most websites that have data that you're allowed to get to, in other words, if you can browse to that data, you can probably create an API call to connect to it. And they offer different versions of it. A lot of times at the footers of websites, you'll see things like API, or you'll see developer tools or something to that nature. And when you click on it, you get to a place like this. Now you'll notice I am logged into Meetup right now. So I can go in as an administrator for this site and do all kinds of things. That makes the rest of using the tools here a lot easier. If you're going to try to do this for yourself and you don't have an account on here, you're probably going to need to get an account in order to make anything really interesting. Even your self data, you're going to need to come up with a good API key for. And part of that is being logged in. I believe it's at the bottom of this page where they'll allow you to request to join a meetup group that is specifically designed for developers to try to hit that data set and return some values. Now, I've been going against our data, but like I said, we don't collect for money. We don't have funds coming in. So there's a whole section of the data that we don't expose. But if I'm really going to thoroughly test out this report idea that I have, I'm going to need to go against a source like that to be able to see what's possible and to come up with the most robust data set out there so that people can use this in other meetup groups automatically and find insights for themselves. So that's just a little guide to you to how to find not just Meetup, but usually any other website. Facebook has these things, Twitter has these things, LinkedIn used to have this. They pulled back the reins quite a bit. So they still have an API call for LinkedIn, but usually now, just for your generic non-professional grade user, you can just click export my contacts. Is about all you can really do, and really just see the most basic features or facts about the people who are in your network. I'm going to probably explore that a little bit more, maybe buck up and pay for a premium license and see if that gives me a little more access, but I'm not sure. So at this point, I'm really curious about the group. Has anyone else attempted this kind of thing? Maybe not against Meetup, but maybe Twitter or Facebook or something like that. Okay, so nobody's really ever programmatically connected to these things before. All right, well, I'll tell you my.
Power BI.
Pardon?
That was Power BI.
Okay, but you've done web service-based requests. Okay, so several of you have. Okay, so is this how I'm guessing, did you do self-taught methods about how to go through and use the service? What were the sites in question that you guys targeted?
Well, Flickr has a really good API
Okay,
and good documentation around it.
okay. So for Flickr, did they offer a choice of response methods? Like, could you pick between, say, JSON or XML output, or?
They had JSON and XML.
Okay, so both. And as far as authentication, were you forced to use signed requests?
No, just a key.
Okay, so you just had a key on yours.
Yeah.
What was yours, sir?
Same thing. I'm looking at using Airtable to produce kind of a little mini content management system kind of thing.
Okay.
And Airtable provides their API in a similar fashion.
Okay.
And again, API key based.
Cool. Tell me, I haven't heard of Airtable before. Is that like OpenTable? Or?
Airtable's it's a really cool spreadsheet-like database out in the cloud. So it presents a really easy way for people to get data in, and then as a developer, I can use that API to pull it out.
Okay.
And do, you know.
So what you said contacts, right? Are these like professional business contacts?
Yeah, I'm an independent developer.
Oh, okay.
So
you're just
yeah,
taking what you can get.
I'm looking at a few different clients that I might be able to use this Airtable stuff with, and part of that will be programmatic stuff for web applications.
Okay.
But I also look at it as potential places for data that could end up in some Power BI for these same clients.
So programmatically, were you using JavaScript or
you know what? I just started to hit it now.
Oh, you're just getting involved.
I'm just now, yeah.
So maybe even just through the browser, even.
What I did find is, because I've done most of my work on the Microsoft stack, is that somebody has already put together a .NET wrapper around what I think is all Node.js. They advertise it mostly as Node.js.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I see a lot of the documentation for, is they anticipate users using Node.
Yeah.
That's cool. What was the source you were in, Chris?
Yelp.
Yelp?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I get notifications from Yelp all the time. They've got hold of me. My wife will not go to a restaurant if it does not have at least a 4-star Yelp. So that's definitely, I tried following that once, and she explain to me later how I messed it up. But Yelp's pretty cool. Was that just a personal project from curiosity?
Yeah, the county actually shares the restaurant reviews, not restaurant reviews, restaurant inspection, excuse me, with Yelp. We were the 3rd place in the country to do that. So I wrote that with SSIS and Python.
Cool. So when I go into a restaurant and I see that little card that says the cleanliness rating is 90 point something.
Yeah. If it's in,
You
well,
posted
if
it's
it's
90 point
in
something.
Wake County, then it's coming from us. Most of the other counties have followed suit. They developed a standard for people to upload the data that way.
That's really cool.
So,
I'm seeing that more with government institutions doing that. I was at a state government, a water and sewage department, or maybe that was a municipal level, but they were sharing their data out with Waze. You guys familiar with Waze for finding your traffic? Well, they would tell Waze ahead of time that they were going to be doing water construction on the roads, and they were going to be tearing things up to replace pipe, and they would actually plan, they would have this reciprocal relationship with them. Waze would tell them when the people are most frequently traveling there, if there's any seasonality where they could kind of slip their project in, and then they would announce that to Waze, and it would push out to the users or the people that were driving that pattern on a regular basis, and tell them, hey, this is coming up, you need to start planning a new route to work because this is going to be a mess in a couple of weeks. And they said it's worked out really well for them. They manage all the pump stations, all the sewage, and everything like that. So it was really beneficial because those projects can really wreak havoc. But that's cool. I mean, so basically nobody's really tried this with any automated tools. I'm hearing programmatic type access. well, your SSIS.
Well, and we actually we've actually started pulling data back from Yelp.
Okay.
And we are using it. I can predict critical restaurant violations 6 days earlier than we could before. So we're able to send out letters to folks to say.
Just because the users are complaining about cleanliness.
No, we're just doing it as an education type of thing. There's a 80% chance that you will have a violation on your next inspection. Here's some things you need to address.
But you're basing, or you said you're getting information back from Yelp. Is that
It's part of the thing. We look at past inspections,
okay.
general in the area, criminal reports, and then the Yelp data, the Yelp reviews, the general sentiment analysis.
So you're doing, okay, so that sentiment analysis is actually providing feedback to those restaurants. Maybe they aren't even really trying on Yelp. They might just be getting reviewed, not even looking at it.
Yeah, we're just able to figure out these are the ones that are most likely to have those type of violations. So.
That's awesome. I love the fact that this is actually forming these types of relationships with data now, that you can have that feedback loop, both positive push and pull.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you go to use one of those tools like you guys have mentioned, usually the first place you start is on the website itself, and I'm lucky that the API documentation for Meetup includes a console. It also includes a very easy way for me to get to my API key. So because, again, I'm logged in, and because I'm a paying member of the group, I can view my API key, and I'm not going to broadcast that here, although I'll probably need to reset it anyway. I was mentioning before the meeting that I've actually exceeded the number of requests, and I learned that I have to be quiet for about an hour before they'll let me off the hook and let me make some more requests. So we'll see how that happens when I click my refresh button. Hopefully the demo gods will be with me. But this API key, in combination with the name of my group, is what I was hoping to use to make this a generic report. So the key, easy enough to find. And also out of curiosity, and I just sort of threw this one in there to see what I could find out about myself, is my personal user ID. And don't worry, anybody can find this out. It's not something really all that special. But you notice when you click on your profile name and you mouse over the profile part of it, of that pop out, notice the bottom there, the URL. See if I can do this while I'm, yeah, that's not happening, is it? There we go. So right down here, this little part, this little serial number is my personal Meetup group ID. So I pulled that as well, and I can make some requests against or using the API key, as well as that ID. And then ultimately, when we're talking about our group, if I click on the group name here, I have refined our group name down to RDUPUG. Luckily, that was available. That is our unique identifier. Some folks have something a lot more complex with that, with some dashes and numbers in it. But when I requested it, it was available. So that makes it a lot easier for you and other folks to find us. And that's our key. So when I came over to the console, oops, that's not the console. Go back.
Hi, Wes.
Console, pardon?
I am not able to see your presentation. Did you hide anything? This is Srinivas.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, was it showing before, Srinivas?
Yeah, it was showing before.
Okay, let me bring that back up for you. I apologize. Thanks for drawing that to my attention.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, do you see it now?
Yeah, it's loading now. It's loading. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll go a little bit slower while it's loading. There we go.
Yeah, I got it.
The console. All right, thank you. So this is the console, and we can ask any one of these request methods against the console here, and we can actually see the output. Because I'm logged in, it will not only automatically input my key, my API key, so I don't have to put that as part of the console request. So let me show you what a console request here looks like. So for our groups, we're just going to go based on a URL name. This will pop up once I've chosen that particular type of API request. It will fill in the required parameters. So in here, I can put in RDU, and notice I've been doing that a couple times today. There we go. That's the only one that's required. I could also filter down my fields list to only those ones that I care about to sort of compress that result request. I forget what that guy's going to do, and omit I haven't used yet. But watch what happens when I click on the show results. I get a couple of useful things. First of all, it is the unsigned request URL. This sign equals true. Sorry about that. Amateur speakers. This is the unsigned request, but it's in the format of a signed request. So all I have to do to make this thing go is add to the end of this query string here a question mark, the word key for the value, or for the pair part of the name value pair, and equals, and then of course my API key. Now they mask it here nicely for demonstrations. Thank you folks at Meetup if that was intentional. But then it gives me the resulting signed URL key. So this makes this request repeatable outside of this console. And this I can share publicly, and I could go over to another really crappy browser and just paste that in, even though I'm not logged in. And now I get the same request results. And the cool thing about that is at the bottom of the request, it actually gives you the repeatable value. So you can see this same base URL come back out, and I can reuse that same HTTP-based request over and over again. I can do that programmatically. But there's some limitations to that. And I found those out very quickly. First of all, I can't adjust any one of these parameters. That signed key only allows me to adjust one value, and that is the offset value. So API requests at Meetup and most organizations are limited. They limit theirs to 200 results for any given request. And the way that they manage it, if you have more than 200 results, is to say that you can have another page. And that offset starts at 0. With this same key, I could reconstruct the URL dynamically and then ask for not just offset 0, but re-request with that same auth key with offset 1, 2, 3, and so on. So at this point, I was doing that very manually. When I was creating this report, the one that I was showing you earlier, when I was making this report, the edit queries that I generated for this guy were static. So the way I managed it was I just made multiple requests. So I'll come back here and I'll show you this. I just made multiple requests to that source over and over again. Here, there we go. I made several requests to that same URL over and over and over again, just knowing, okay, after doing it several times through the console, there are only 88 members of our group now, so I only have to make one call for that. But then when I look at all of the groups that you guys are members of, well, there's thousands of those. So I would have to iterate several times over those. And I didn't really get all of them to the other groups that you guys are members of. So that's really clunky. Initially, I was also doing it as an export to a CSV file. So I would go through this console and I would literally scrape this value out. I tried that in the beginning, very, very clumsy. The alternate method is to go over to another browser and actually get a file response back. So that's workable. And if you need to share this request out with others, then this is the way to do it, is to come up with these signed keys. But in Power BI, it's not very easy to use the request with your key and then take the signed request and then make it reusable that way. So if we're going to do all of this, how's it going?
Hey.
So
User
you're
grouping?
Pardon?
User grouping?
Yeah, for Power BI. Interesting?
Cool. Cool. I didn't know we had user grouping for Power BI.
Yes, we do. Now you do. Now you got to join. Now you got to come every week. I
Just
hope
know.
we only do it every month.
See you
Cool.
later.
Thanks. So, yeah, it was very manual, and if you wanted to do the request and you wanted to build all of this logic into a single program, you still needed the auth key. So then the light goes off, and I say, well, if I need to take the key in anyway, and I need to save it in the Power BI file, why not just take that in as a parameter, allow the user to enter it, never ever broadcast it back out as part of the data, the auth key as part of the report results, not even as part of the data set results. I marked it for not enabled for the load. So then anybody else could pick up my PBX file. Of course, I would strip my user group and my auth key out of it. And then they would be able to enter their credentials, easily found just the way I did. But then when they refresh the data set, it would rehydrate with all of their tables. So that's what I started to do over the last several days. And I learned very quickly that there's some additional challenges when you do that. So this is the loaded version. This is actually me getting yelled at because I made 50 calls for 200 rows inside of a couple seconds. Apparently, Meetup frowns upon that kind of thing. So I got a response back at one point saying that I've submitted too many requests, that I need to slow down and let them catch up. And they promised in an hour they would reset it. So I discovered that one of the solutions that I had, which is unfortunately a little less elegant and a little brute force, to be honest with you, not what I would call myself proud of as far as a solution. But I'll start off here with the simplest one that we've got. I've taken in 3 parameters, as I mentioned before. The user group name, the parameter set for that. I allow any text value here because really I can't make a list for you. You're just going to have to be able to sort that one out for yourself. Same thing with the key. You're going to enter that. And just for fun, I put in my user number, and I've got my own personal membership information showing up too as an individual. So then I pass those values and construct the string that each one of these requests forms. So let's start with the group. The group, of course, we're only expecting one result. So this particular request will support a common delimited list of groups, and you could look at this in a larger fashion. So if you want to ask a question about lots of groups, maybe in a particular geography or related to an individual, you could reform this in a different way and allow that. So what I did is go out to my console, and instead of taking this signed URL, I would use the console to get the results that I liked. Then I would copy this guy out and simply tag my key at the end of it. And then I was able to get the response in Power BI just the same way as I do here in the console, but of course, without being logged in. So this is the way we construct that source. Before I begin there, let me give you guys just a quick look at the beginning, very early step of this. And that is to start a new source and choose a web URL. And I think I copied that out of here, did I? And I paste this guy in here. And I click OK, and I will get a failure. And I don't want to put that on. Actually, let me just grab the other one because I know that's going to work. And I don't have to record and broadcast my authorization key for all time. Okay. So then if I click OK, I'll get a fresh data source. I can choose the level at which my request is going through. And the way this particular API is set up is it starts at the user group level as a slash and then applies all of the parameters after the fact. And we're going to make an anonymous request because we can. With that auth key, I can publish that out to the whole world. And then we see the results come back in this list format. From here, I can take this and drill further in. I could expand these records. Typically, before I would manipulate this, notice again, I got this as a list. I would want to convert this into a table first, and then expand on those records. So you can imagine multiple organizers. Well, we got to drill out and get 2 rows for that data. So this is very relational, and it has a hierarchy in that JSON format that I'm bringing it back. That one, because that was just an example to see, to show you guys how to kick that off. Actually, before I do, I'll go back and I'll revisit the source there. So this is the way it's going to look by default. And then if I wanted to parameterize this, I simply kick this over to the advanced mode, and I start plucking out those parts that are more dynamic. So let's say, for instance, that this was my API key instead of my signed key. So I could just do something like that, cut that guy out of there, and then instead of namefully putting it in, pasting it here, I can flip that over to a parameter that I've defined already, and then whenever the user uses that, it will construct that string in a way like this. And then it abstracts that for this preview view, but you get the idea that the group name will be added there. Now that's not the right solution here. I have a different parameter. Actually, I should probably show you that. I would actually use the key value. But even that key is wrong. That's my API key that I've got parameterized. That was the one that I chopped out of there, was the signed authorization key specific to this request. So on some of these other ones, I've gotten far more dynamic with this. So I don't need this guy anymore. So on group, I wanted to pass in several different values, both the key and the URL name. So again, I passed those as this sort of dynamic construction, and you can add as many parameters and parts as you would like. You can make that as dynamic as you need it to. So for the group, pretty easy stuff, right? I'm only ever going to get one result back because I'm only going to pass in one value there, at least for my purposes, and at least when I have a table called my group. So I'm envisioning somebody like me in my position running another group that they want to look at. Perhaps later I'll come up with a common delimited list of groups for analysis of, say, my competitors, the other groups in my area, or the other groups that you guys attend. I might do it differently there. But this one and only record, I asked for my result set, my page set, to only contain one row. So that limits the request time, makes things a little bit more streamlined, but it also makes it tantalizingly easy to do. Where the complexity comes in is when we want to do something like look at all of our group members. So this request I have been wrestling with. Now, there's only 88 of us, right? But if you remember, way back at the beginning of the meeting, I showed you one of the groups that you guys are members of has upwards of 12,000 members. So if I was to do that one, I would need, I don't know how many hundred calls to be able to make that at 200 a pop. And I ran out of requests for my account at just 50 calls. So that was exceeding the capacity. So I wanted to get something a little bit more sophisticated to do that. So I started looking at automating this by revisiting, going back to my groups column and saying, well, what if I came over here and I grabbed a value called members. So now I know for sure this group only has 88 members. So if I divide 88 by 200, I get a number less than 2, or actually less than 1. but I would have one call would cover it. So I would round up to 1. And for that one request, I would make a zero-based set of values, only one row in that result, so that I would only call my 200 results one time. Now, when it comes to 10,000 records, 20,000 records, I forget how many users were in there, I'm not going to be able to solve that with this solution for that number of members. But when it comes to things like the groups that we are members of, the other groups, the other topics that we're interested in, some of us, 5, 6 topics. Remember the word cloud? That's where that comes from, is what we've expressed our interests in. Also, the other groups have their topics that they talk about, the categories that their groups are trying to associate themselves with. And ultimately, we try to match users and their interests with the groups and the topics that they talk about, and put those people together. And that's how Meetup does its sort of recommendations for you. At those levels, with a group our size, I can manage bringing back all of the events if I'm judicious about it, and I only make the number of calls that I need. Where I have failed, and I can't explain this to you guys yet, but I will plow through this, is actually taking a dynamic number at the data load time that at this point is less than 1, but it could be upwards of 3 or 4 different calls I might need to make. Taking that dynamic number off of this data set and then taking it to the next step and iterating over multiple requests in subsequent API calls. So from group, I take 88, and let me show you this this other method that I had explored. So the way I started this is I made a copy of that same group table, that first row of output. The next thing I did is I removed all the other columns for the sake of confusion, and now I've just got that core number that I want to calculate off of. Then I added a custom column, and that column arrived at 5. So because we only have 88 members, and one request will satisfy 200 members, I self-inflicted that it would only take 20 as a result set. So each one of my page requests, instead of 200, I only get 20 back. And now I'm forced to make multiple calls to get my 88. I need 5, because 80 at 4 calls would only give me the first 80. I'd miss those last 8, so I'd have to burn a few extras there for that 5th call. So all dynamically, I'm doing this programmatically in M language to derive down to this 5. Then I remove the other column so that I could make this into a list, and then I could have an invoked function that would do that repeated call for me. But the first thing I have to do is I have to take that 5, and I need to get 5 rows, and I need that to start at the number 0. So the way I did that was to invoke this custom function in order to add those rows in. So at this point, we just have a table of results. So I'm just trying to get a table that I could then reuse to make the calls. And this is that final step. When I expand that table, now, based on the fact that this is a number 5, now I have my zero-based set of offset values to use. Now, the temptation would be here to make an additional function. In this case, I've called it the group members function. And what this guy does, let me show you the M query for this guy. It goes and it passes in a value. I called it the offset number. And that value that's passed into this function, this load members function that I created, is all I do is concatenate that to the end of the string for the API call. So that same API key listed earlier on based on the parameter value that was entered, so I didn't have to break that one out, or I did have to break that one out separately from the string. But that wasn't part of the function call, that's part of the parameter call. This offset value that we're putting at the very end of the string is something I'm allowed to do. So I can just keep using that same API key, and that each 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'll be able to pass in that offset value and I get the results. The problem comes in that this first table that I want to use to represent that, this guy that we got to, it already has a data source connected to it. It's already had that request, and these results are not available to me at the time of data load. So to just sort of force through and get something out of the functions that I've created so far, I created a separate request. And on this guy, what I did is took a deliberate list. So I derived these values just from data that was entered, spreadsheet style here in Power BI. And I initially took this offset column, and I jacked it up to 50. And I said, okay, I'll take 2,000 people. You can limit your report request to 2,000 people or more. That seems pretty reasonable. I'll put 50 of these guys in here, and then I'll use this value, which is not dynamically generated, and I'll just make a few extra calls. And then at the end, I'll just filter out all the null values at the bottom for the extra calls that weren't used. Unfortunately, 49 of those or 44 of those cost me, and that's why my refresh failed. So I backed this guy back down to something more reasonable. And now when I do it, and penance to the demo gods, let's see if this is going to work for me here. So now you'll see that we've changed the type from text to number. Next step is to invoke that function that I showed you that makes the call dynamically. Then I expand that table out to each one of the records. Now I know I'm on the right track, because if I scroll down here, I get my 88 records, and then those last few are just burned. That's wasted. I kind of anticipate that going in. Then I expand that column, and now I get all my data. Okay? Less than elegant, but still has a degree of automation to it. So there's the list of all of you guys, and now I actually started doing some other things. The first step I took was to filter out these nulls at the bottom here, so I got rid of those, and I'm just down to the 88 columns that I need, and then I started getting rid of the indexes and unused columns. Not quite finished with that, but I'm not really all that excited about investing a lot more in it, because it's not really the solution I want. I really want to get to that programmatic level where I can do this dynamically. Remember, I'm still forcibly knowing what my total number of calls are, and if I exceed that, I'm really wasting it. So earlier on, when I had my sort of brute force method, this is the way it used to work. I just made multiple calls. I created several queries with the exact same request, like this guy here, and then I just forcibly set the offset value for this one for 0. The next one was 1. That's the only difference between each one of these queries. And then at the end, I just masked those from import and merged them into a single result. That was really crude. That was the one that I definitely knew I didn't want to do that. That's kind of embarrassing to see that many tables up there to get this thing working. At least this way, I'll be able to eliminate all of those, and I'll be down to just my parameters. And ultimately, I get rid of that bad request that I had up there and have my 3 parameters and my 2 functions to drive that. Actually, at this point, I'm not even convinced I can use that list generator function, because the second I combine those 2 together, that's when the multiple calls from the data source sort of trips me up. So that presents a bit of a problem. But let's cross our fingers here, and let's see if this guy is going to load. Actually, I can make one less call. Yeah, I'm just going to let it fly. Let's see what happens. Okay, did I get my group numbers loaded? Looks like it. So how many IDs do I have? Yep. All right, so if I do a count, Hey, I got everybody in. I did all of my extra calls in there. It was a little bit more elegant, but not entirely well hashed out. I have been assured by some people and by some comments that I've read that this is something that's possible, is to do this. I'm just not quite getting it the right way. Initially, I tried taking that 5 value, I shouldn't say initially, several tries in. After the row generator didn't work for me, I tried teasing out that number 5 as a parameter. But unfortunately, you still have to provide a default parameter anytime that you want to have something that the users can engage with. And the result of that is that the default parameter is the one that, oh, and I actually removed it because it wasn't working. But the default parameter is the only one that you're going to see when one is picked. If the user doesn't know to come in here and then choose the other parameter, and how would they know which one was the right one to use, then the subsequent refresh of this data set wouldn't have worked either. So that was kind of a limitation of parameters. So I scrapped the parameter method as another option. So, does that sound exciting? Does that sound cool to you guys? Do you think there's any value in something that you might be able to do with that if we were able to get this level of request through? If I could get just a single refresh request running at one time and not just hammer this thing over and over all day long, I might be able to get a significant amount of data out of there, at least about my immediate group and the members. Because ultimately where my dream for this thing is going is if I can get all of my members, and then I can look at all of the groups that you belong to, and all of the groups that you've RSVP'd to their events, then I can look at my event calendar and come up with collisions for you guys. So if I would know before I go in and create a meetup, I could say, okay, let me open up a calendar view here and say of all of my members, if I pick this date, what have they already RSVP'd for in advance? And I'll just know there's very little likelihood that they're going to show up to this meeting. And I think that would be something that would be pretty useful to other meetup folks, and they might be able to find some value in that. You could get a little bit more sophisticated with it. And for instance, I have several members of the group who have RSVP'd who we have never met. So this is only our 3rd meeting, but they have been on that list every time, and not once have they signed in. So now I could also sort of wait for, say, Harry's sake and say, okay, well, we had 28 folks RSVP tonight. This is a pretty typical turnout, but this is not 28 people, okay? So I could tell them, with a fair degree of confidence that we're going to have somewhere between 15 and 18 people only buy enough pizza for that number of people. To us, that's sort of small potatoes, but if you think about it from a monetary perspective, some of those larger groups, if they're charging some money, they could determine, if I could plan a meeting on the right day and my venue is only going to charge me this, then maybe I might only need to charge my users this much because I'll probably get so many of them to show up. Then you throw something like Monday Night Football into the mix and now bets are off. But that was my idea, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to blitz through this problem at some point and come up with a resolution. I'm also hoping that some of you guys might feel interested in this and who are better at the graphical elements to maybe help me out with some cool visualizations. And also potentially some business folks who are strong with DAX maybe to come up with some interesting measures when we're comparing some time intelligence between those. Some confidence measures of those folks who say they're going to show up but don't show up. We could weight our membership that way. The last meeting, I put a challenge out there for everybody who'd shown up at the meeting before. I sent them an email and said, make sure that you've got your social media, your Power BI user group website, as well as the meeting group website on there. Make sure you RSVP and do it early. And we sort of weighted folks according to that on the list. And that was our prize winner for the night. So we could do something similar like that here with the meetup and have some confidence levels and things like that. So, yes, Chris.
I'm saying I can do some stuff. Sure.
Oh, you'd like to participate? Great. Okay. So I was thinking if I can get over this major hurdle, I might like to put something out on a CodeShare site or something and kind of open it up to the community and see if, of course, you guys are interested. We can do that and maybe open it up to the rest of the world. I like to see when our partners, and I say our as Microsoft partners, work with us. Big corporations, companies like ServiceNow or Salesforce, we've got really easy data connectors into those things.
The ServiceNow one's not so easy.
It's not? I haven't used it.
Slow. It is so slow.
Oh, so they've kind of got you throttled down too.
Mhm.
Okay. But that's my idea is I would say ease of use maybe.
Yeah, you can connect.
Yeah, you can get logged in, but that's about it.
And it's only to one part of ServiceNow. So if you own multiple modules,
Okay.
it's only to it's a module.
Okay. Does anyone use Rally? It's a, you use Rally?
Rally software, not part of CA, you mean?
The one where they've got the workflow and they also have some ticketing, but it's mostly they've got like a Kanban version. They've got the other one.
Yeah, a lot of people don't have Rally. So Rally was developed in Raleigh.
Oh, it was? Oh,
Yeah.
so I used that a long time ago at a former employer, and I know the guys that were doing the ETL on that thing. I was responsible for everything after the ETL. I did the warehouse design and the reporting face to it. They had a heck of a time doing that. They had it actually split into two major fields of API calls. They had an historical one that would allow you to grab some aggregated data, and then they had the most recent data that you could get each one of the transactions. And of course, it's very tempting to go against those aggregations, but inevitably they aren't exactly what you're looking for in your business. So we were trying to ETL those out and provide our own historical versions of those data points on a regular basis. And I kind of hoped to see one of those because I know on the open source side, Rally was a very popular tool, and I could see somebody wanting to tap into that with a tool like Power BI directly if at all possible. So anyway, that's my presentation for you guys. If you have questions, I'd be happy to field those. If you have other Power BI concerns, anything anyone's been working on that you haven't been able to come up with a solution for, we can work on those as well, or we can just dig out on some pizza and call it a night. It's up to you. Yes?
Can we go over the piece where you were like, I had to enter in the values manually in the table?
Yes. I will be happy to go back to the editor.
Yeah, it's in there.
Pardon?
I'm talking with someone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I think I did it with this one. So my source, I started off with just a enter data option, and I manually typed these in.
And that's one of the pieces you want to eliminate from this solution?
Exactly, because when it's static like this, it doesn't require that initial query to the data source to derive these rows. As soon as I go over, I'm going to cancel that.
And you initially created that from the enter data?
Yeah, if I just go up to...
Because I can't figure out how, once I've done that, how to edit it.
Oh, it's real easy. I'll click on enter data.
Yeah.
I'll give a new column. I'll put a value in there. I'll click OK. And now I've got, wait for it, I've got table 1. And there's my results, and if I need to edit it, I just go back up to the source and I click on the cog, and now I can just do more values.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, that wasn't on the test.
No, that was not on the test.
But it should be because we all struggle.
Yeah, that silly.
Yeah.
So I wasn't looking there. I was just trying to
Oh, just in here, just trying
Yeah,
to
just trying to,
Yeah,
type something else.
double click,
Yeah.
triple click.
Yeah.
Won't let you. What I was actually surprised at, honestly, on that was that I was able to come up here and adjust those columns. I initially, when I was doing these for lookups, I would load it all in as column 1, column 2, and then I'd go change column name, change column name, and then I saw somebody just come up here and go like this, and I said, "Oh, you're kidding me." It takes a lot more transformation. Anyway, I'm sorry. So
And what was your criteria for coming up with the, I'm gonna do 5 rows?
that was simply me backing down from 50 rows because I did the math on 200 requests at 50 rows. I can have 2,000, 10,000 results. No, 2,000. 5 times 2 is 10, that's 1,000, 10,000 results. And if I had a really big meetup group, then that would cover it. And I didn't expect to get shut down after request number, I think it was 10 or something like that. They said, whoa, slow down. So this brute force method, I've tried to get really tricky with it. I tried having the table initially, and then I tried to do a filter on those rows based on that parameter value. And even that, I get that real quick warning. The results for your data set or for your query were derived from another source. Please restructure this request. It doesn't exactly give you any guidance on how to go about that, but anyway, so you know, follow.
I encountered a problem like that this week, and I might be able to help.
Oh, awesome. So what was did you come up with a solution or are you trying a solution?
Yeah, so in the advanced editor, I had to change my source. First, I had to declare my source, and then the next step had to be a value of the native query.
Okay.
And then that way, it let me reference that from another.
Of the native, actually, let me open that up because that's the last place I was working with it. So let me just do it in this base one here. So if I go to view, check my editor. So you're saying after the source, the very next thing?
Right, so you want to replace whatever piece of that source is the actual query parameters. So just declare the source first, and then query the source as a second step.
So I'm sorry, before the source here.
I can show you the example I have.
Oh, cool.
It wasn't.
Are you able to join a meetup?
Yes.
Could I send you an attendee request so that we could see this all together? And that'd be kind of cool because I've never done it quite like that.
Oh, I don't know if I should like broadcast my, because it does have like database names.
Personal information? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe just sort of talk through it.
Yeah, let me pull up the example. So it'll take me a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, quick question while
Yes.
doing that. If you have a calls per second or calls per minute limitation, wouldn't you have to throttle your calls?
Yes. Right. And slowing that down, there are ways to time that. But ultimately, in the end, you're going to be making so many for this that I think you could do it over an hour. The other concern that I had about this is ultimately I wanted to publish it out to the Power BI service and allow someone to automatically refresh on a scheduled basis. And if you make those data set refreshes take too long, there is the potential for a timeout there. So I just wanted to be able to do it once on a small scale that didn't exceed, just to prove I could do that part, and then later on get fancier and fancier with timing and things like that. But you bring up a good point that if you could slow this thing down, then my brute force might work a little better. I could over ask, or maybe even find a way to interrupt it midstream. If I detected that I had reached the end, like maybe a null result would cause me to go back and then terminate the request. It's another possibility.
Is there a way to do things like that programmatically in Power BI?
in,
I know, like I can see how I would do it in C# or even
I'm
TC even.
a lot more comfortable on the DAC side of this equation, but unfortunately that's after the load.
Oh,
And
okay,
I can
so,
do a lot of manipulations there, but at this point, really with these requests, you've got to do pretty much all of this stuff upfront in the M language.
or stored in a database and then reported on Power BI. That's my first thought.
That's a, yeah, I'll actually,
Use
the
SIS and
tool
every-
that twisted it for me would be, let's open up SSIS.
Mhm.
We can do all of our timing, we can paste this thing, we can manage it very easily, but then that takes the fun out of it for
Yeah.
the generic user. Oh, wait a minute, I don't have SSIS, I don't have a SQL Server database, I just want to do this all in Power BI. So that was sort of this part of the challenge to myself.
Mhm.
To get this rolling is no other tools other than Power BI stuff. So.
There's no such thing as like, where the building plugins for the front part of Power BI or back, or this
There's
part
data
of it.
connectors. There are custom data connectors that you can do.
So then you could use C# to do it if you had built a custom data connector to an API.
I could see that, but to be honest, the learning curve on getting all this set up in C#. I am not a .NET developer, so it's probably easier for me to come in this direction. But that you bring up a good point. That could be another out for me if this doesn't work out. So, anyway. So
Can you easily make it give you the error message without having to change a lot? The error message that you were seeing before.
oh yeah. So actually, I kept the old one that was a problem. So this is where, as far as I got. Then I went to add a column, and I invoked a function, and I invoked the my user group function, and I passed in my new column with my 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I click OK, and it says the reference other query steps.
Thinking about the. Okay, yeah, that's the same message I got.
Okay.
It was for an analysis services source instead of like a JSON, so it might look a little different, but I think it's the same problem.
Okay.
So I pulled up the example here.
Was that on a site you saw on a blog or something, or that you? Oh, you're just your personal example.
I mean, you mean how I found an answer to this?
Yeah. What was is yours on just on your own PBX file?
Yes.
Okay.
But then I Googled the error message and
okay.
it took some forums browsing and
A little bit, yeah. There's a few things out there on it. So let me open up the advanced editor for this, and maybe you can point me where you were able to resolve it. Actually, I'm not going to use that one because that's a reference table that I used for that. That wasn't a good example. Go back to this one. Okay.
so can we make a copy of that real quick in Notepad++, just so we don't screw it up.
Trash it up too bad?
Yeah.
That's okay. It's not that big of a thing. Okay. So what you were saying that you would split out?
Yeah, so there was a source, and then I declared my source, and then source 2 equals value.native query, and then you reference the source that you just declared in the first step.
Okay, I'm sorry. So source 2
Yeah,
equals
value.native query, that's like capital V and
oh yes, I forgot. Case sensitive.
capital N and capital Q,
Dot query or just native?
just native query.
Okay.
And then open parentheses and source, and then comma, and then here is, I'm not entirely sure how it's going to translate from this type of
the
data
JSON
source.
document.
Yeah, I can't see the rest of the string.
Yeah, it's pretty long, and it's got the. Ultimately, it's going to have that parameter name in it. but these prove to be a little bit tricky forming in your dynamic values for the key.
Okay, because I would imagine that the source is probably the base URL, and then that the query would effectively be the parameters that you're passing in.
Mhm.
But it would probably, it might take some fiddling.
So basically, this second reference here allows me to dynamically generate the call for this URL.
Without getting that error message about
Okay.
yeah.
Alrighty. I would love to see the solution. Not that I want you to send me the data, but if you could send me the reference where you found that solution, as well as just the masked version of the code. Don't include any of your database names.
Yeah, I can send you what I did here with just masking some information, and then you can see how it might apply to, you know, a JSON document source, because
It's a little different than AS, yeah.
it's a little different, but like I've had to do this step with multiple types of data sources, and it's worked for both. So I hope and I think it would work for this as well.
That's awesome. It's more hope than I've had in a couple days on getting this resolved. So cool.
Yes.
Well, thank you for offering that up. That's definitely a help. All right. Well, I'm going to stop our recording. Do you guys have any other challenges that you've been working through, or anything else that's been troubling you guys? It's not all just about what Wes wants to work on for fun.